Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Allison Ford, Vice President here at the Headhunters. I can see we've got a really large turnout for this edition of our webinar series, so thanks very much for taking part. Today's webinar topic covers two key areas to help set you up for success in your job search and career: how to make your resume sizzle and how to interview like a pro. A couple housekeeping items before we begin. We're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat panel and we'll address as many as we can during the presentation or right at the end. You can choose in the chat there to share questions with everyone online today or just to ask them privately to the panelists. We invite you to sit back and take in everything you're going to learn today over the next 45 minutes. There's really no need to scramble to write everything down. We're going to be sending an email tomorrow to all attendees with the link to this recording, and it will include the audio and video recording of the slides. So sit back and just soak it all up. Now to introduce our presenter, the Headhunters' very own Danielle Bragge. Danielle is our president and co-founder and has spent 25 years in the recruitment industry. She's been a consultant and entrepreneurial business owner both here in Canada and in South Africa. What we love about Danielle is how she's committed her career to building up successful businesses by helping companies focus on people and leadership teams, and that really starts with supporting job seekers like you. She's a career development coach and certified talent assessor. So Danielle's been busy training and developing staff for over 20 years. Now, Danielle has a big heart as well and runs a not-for-profit organization with her family, leading teams from North America to countries like Nicaragua and Guatemala, and partners with local organizations to help care for their country's most impoverished people. In today's webinar, Danielle's going to share some of her many words of wisdom from her experience in recruitment and really help you learn how to make your resume stand out and how to have more successful job interviews. She's going to focus primarily on the most common mistakes she sees and give you all action steps to getting it right the first time. So let's get started. Danielle, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ellie. I really appreciate the introduction, and I hope that everyone can hear me clearly. So we're going to try and keep this as to about 30 minutes with me kind of running through some tips and ideas for your job search. And then, as Elliot said, we'll do some questions and answers at the end. We do have a lot of content in today's webinar. So don't feel like Ali had said that it's necessary to grab a pen and paper and frantically write everything down, as we will be sending out a copy of the recording and the PowerPoint presentation to you tomorrow. But essentially today we're going to take it from two different perspectives. We're going to talk a little bit about resumes and cover letters. What are some of the most common mistakes that we're seeing, and what are the things that you could do to really get your resume to stand out? Then we're going to switch gears completely, and we're going to move over to job interviews, various tips and presentations in preparation for those interviews. Now, if there is any additional information that you're looking for, all of our information that we provide to our candidates, we have a lot of excellent resources, can be found on our website as well. So you might find some other things that we don't cover today that could also help you in your job search. So without any further ado, I'd like to do a very quick poll. I'd love to see who's currently looking for a new job, who's thinking about looking, is very passive, and who's really just looking to understand when the time comes how to better enhance their resume and their interviewing tips. So if you guys could take the time to complete the poll, that'll give us a little bit of insight and certainly help me maybe just to change or tweak some of the things that I talk about today. Excellent. Okay, so we got a couple of people that are not looking for a new job, but most of you are on the market, 64%. So thank you. That helps me a little bit to really understand how we can continue to support you as we speak today. All right, so let's start with resumes. We really are going to, as I say, cover a lot of information, but I'm going to start with the most common mistakes that we see. And for some of you, you might be going, are you kidding me? Why would you even put this into your presentation? But you'd be amazed some of the things that we see that come across our desks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the very first and one of the very first, and actually surprisingly enough, the most common mistake we make or candidates make, and that's the email address and voicemail. We see all kinds of weird and wonderful email addresses. And here's a great example of one that we've seen in the past. Voicemails are very much the same. You know, my son, I'm going to use him as an example. He's not looking for a job. But if he were looking for a job, I'd probably say to him, Josh, you need to change your voicemail. Because all his voicemail says is, hey, it's Josh. You know what to do. Beep. If you are looking for a job, that very first impression, which is your voicemail and your email address, really does need to have a professional content to it. Think also about your social media presence. A lot of hiring managers and HR managers aren't just looking at your resume, and they're not just looking at your LinkedIn profile. They're taking that extra step. They're jumping onto different forms of social media, looking at what you tweet, looking at your Facebook page. So if you are very active on other forms of social media, either find if you can either put it up so that it's just accessible to friends or family, or clean up your social media footprint. You'd be amazed how many candidates are turned down because of what people find online. LinkedIn, this is a really big one. It is absolutely amazing to me how many candidates have got excellent resumes. But when we cross-reference those resumes with LinkedIn, their LinkedIn profiles have different dates, different job responsibilities, or it's not updated. More and more hiring managers are cross-referencing your resume with your LinkedIn. So if you are planning on putting your resume forward to an employer, you need to make sure that there's consistency between what you put on your LinkedIn profile and what you put in on your resume. Also ask previous coworkers or hiring managers that you've worked for to put referrals on your LinkedIn. Your referrals are going to speak much louder than any other form of communication. And then be intentional when you save your resume on file. Try and save it in something as simple as your first name and your last name. We see resumes coming through our website all the time, or coming directly to us through candidates, and they'll have things like first draft, EA resume, sales resume. The first thing that you do when you do a resume that doesn't just have your first name and last name, but will say final draft, the first thing that goes through the hiring manager's mind is, well, firstly, how many resumes does she have? And how many different jobs are they targeting? Are we just plan A or are we plan B? And then please, 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 if you are not detailed or you're not an English whiz, forward your resume onto a friend, a professor, a previous colleague, previous employer, somebody that you trust that can give you honest and open feedback, can really take another look at your resume to make sure that you have no spelling and grammar errors. We have many clients who will not interview a candidate when they receive a resume and the resume has got grammar mistakes on it. It doesn't have to be many, it can just be one or two. But you really need to think about how the rest of the world sees your resume. Now let's talk a little bit about the resume itself. This is an interesting one because we see all kinds, again, of weird and wonderful resumes. Some of them quite beautiful, but the beautiful ones are not necessarily the ones that are doing the trick. The first thing I want to say is keep your resume where you can to about 1 to 2 pages. And yes, for some of you that have been in business as long as I have, I recognize that you likely can't get all of your work experience on 2 pages. 3 pages is also fine. What's not okay is the 12, 10, 15-page resumes. You know, when a hiring manager looks at your resume, he's giving it a 5 to 10-second glance. If they don't see what they need to see in those first 5 seconds, they're passing it over for someone else. So you really want to make sure that the content is tight, clean, and very applicable to the job that you're applying for. Keep the font the same. One header for the one font for the header, one font for the body. And go with a really clean, easy to read font like Arial, Calibri, Vernanda. You know, we see lots of beautiful italic ones and different colored fonts and all sorts, like I said, of weird and wonderful fonts. You know, the harder it is to read, the more fatigue the hiring manager is going to have, and the less likely they'll be to actually invest in the content of your resume, which is really what you want them to see. Align everything to the left. Use bullet points and lots of white space where you can so that it becomes very skimmable. You know, when we look at resumes, and many of our recruiters come out of HR, and it's no different for HR managers or even for busy line managers. When we look at a resume, really what we're doing is we're skimming the top of the resume to make sure that what we need to see is actually on the resume. Does this person's resume align with the jobs that we're currently hiring for? So if it's not skimmable, quick and easy to read, with your experience in reverse chronicle order, meaning put your most recent jobs first, we really will pass over that resume for a resume that's easy to read. I can't tell you how refreshing it is when we get resumes that come across our desk that actually are in reverse chronicle order, nicely laid out, aligning to the left, simplistic font. It just makes our lives a lot easier. Education. When you are applying for a job where your education is applicable to that particular job, for example, if you're an accountant and you're designated, put your education first. If you're a CHIRP designated candidate and you're applying for an HR job, put your education first. But if you have an education that really isn't applicable to anything that you're applying for, it is important to have it on the resume, but drop it to the bottom. You really want anything that's applicable for the job that you're applying for today to be first and foremost. And then for those of you that are relatively new to Canada, and I know I made this mistake when I came, in South Africa, everybody puts their photographs on their resumes. In North America, this isn't common practice, and we don't want any of the clients discriminating against somebody for any reason. So please leave your photographs off your resumes. Okay, so we talked about the content. Now we're going to talk about the sizzle, and this is exciting stuff. This is the part of your resume that makes you unique. It's the piece that makes you stand out. So I want you to write down, if you do have a pen and paper today, I want you to write down one thing on that pen and paper, and I want you to, on that piece of paper, and I want you to write, what makes me uniquely different? Why am I a better candidate than the other 10, 20, 30, 100 candidates that are applying for the same job? And this is a big piece of your resume, or of resumes that candidates often overlook. They do an excellent job of outlining what they've done in the past, who they are. The font is nice, the bullet points are nice, the white space looks great, but they don't make it sizzle. And this is the part that's going to make you stand out. So my recommendation is always, always to try and quantify your accomplishments. And when you quantify your accomplishments, again, I want you to put on your CEO or your VP hat. What makes you different? Why should this VP hire you before he hires any other individual? So numbers are always excellent. So ideas on how to quantify in numbers is, where did you save a company time? If you're an accountant, did you improve a budget process by creating a new spreadsheet? If you're in any other role, was there a way that you maybe saved? Maybe you're an operations manager and you outsourced to a new phone provider, or your HR and you looked at a new benefits program or benefits package, or you just improved a process. Everybody has got something on their resume that they could say that they have done that makes them uniquely different. It doesn't have to be more than one accomplishment per job, but you definitely need to have that on your resume. And, you know, filing, color coordinating, a filing cabinet isn't what's going to do it. It has to be something that you can turn to and say, I saved them either time, money, or improved a process. My recommendation for this is, for the last 3 jobs, again, depending on how often you move around, you definitely want to have accomplishments on your resume. And it could be just a simple case of putting it after your bullet points, based on the various different responsibilities that you've done within the company. Just put in paragraph form underneath accomplishments, and then just put in a paragraph of some of those or one of those accomplishments. If you have many, put one or two down. But again, be careful not to overload your reader with too much information. Some of those accomplishments could even be great ones to bank for when you go into the interview. So I want to do one more poll, because part of the resume submission to an employer is the cover letter. And this is a question we get a lot of. Do you do a cover letter? Don't you do a cover letter? Do you do a cover letter? Don't you do a cover letter? So I want to get a sense of who is actually submitting cover letters. Just waiting for those numbers to come in. Looks like people are still polling. Thank you so much for your contribution. This is very helpful. Good. Okay. I'm really pleased to see that 69% of people are submitting a cover letter. And for those of you that don't submit a cover letter, this might be something you really want to think about. But there's a definite art to what a cover letter should look like. First of all, I want to say that if you're working with a recruitment firm like the Headhunters, you know, essentially a good recruiter is your walking, talking cover letter. We don't submit cover letters when we submit your resume on your behalf. And honestly, the reason for that is that if we can't speak about what you've done and what some of your accomplishments are and why we're excited about you as a candidate, then we're not doing a good job. So we are your cover letters. But for those of you that are applying directly to hiring managers and HR managers, this is something I would definitely encourage you to add to your resume. So let's talk a little bit about what cover letters should look like today. Not what they looked like 10 years ago, because they have changed quite dramatically, but what they should look like a little bit today. So the first thing is, it should, as I said, accompany a resume. You can either do it as a separate Word document, or you could bring it into the body of the email. It's entirely up to you. The biggest mistakes that we see, though, is even with us, we see cover letters coming our way that will say, "Dear hiring manager," or "Dear HR manager." You know, that doesn't leave the person who's hiring feeling warm and fuzzy. Every employer wants to think that they are the only company that you're applying to. And we know this isn't reasonable, but that's really what they want. They want to feel warm and fuzzy about your application. So if you don't have the name of the hiring manager, pick up the phone, talk to reception, say, "I'm submitting a cover letter and I just wanted to know what the name of your HR manager is." 9 times out of 10, they'll give you that name. Then that way you can at least address it to a person. Keep your cover letter short and sweet. Cover letters that are a full page with lots and lots of information are ones that typically get looked over. But 2 or 3 paragraphs, most HR managers would actually invest in reading your cover letter. Stick to a standard business letter format, even if you're sending it in the body of an email. And talk about specifically why you want their job, not just any job. So again, this is very similar to the objective in a cover letter. Some of your resumes might even have that little tagline at the top that talks about why you'd be good for the job. If you are going to do an objective or you are going to do a cover letter, it needs to be very specific to that job. So one of the things that you should invest time in is take a look at the job description. What is the client telling you they want? What are the things that are important to them? And then how do you fit into that? So again, it becomes very personalized and not just generic. Describing how you would fit into the company is really important. More and more employers are talking about hiring for culture. Yes, they want a candidate with a certain skill set, but at the end of the day, they want somebody who's going to fit into the culture of the organization. And some of this information you can gather on a website, but a lot of it would be put into the job description. So make sure you include that. And then this sounds like a very, very, very obvious comment, but I'm going to say it anyway because we see it all the time. Put your contact information on the cover letter and also put it on your resume. But when you put it on your resume, make sure your contact information is the same size font as the rest of your name and information. I can't tell you how many resumes I get and everything is in a 10 or 12 font and the contact number is in a 6 or 7. And I'm at the age where I need glasses. So I'm having to blow that font up and then having to make the call from there. You want it to be a 1-step process for the hiring manager, not a 2 or 3-step process for them to pick up the phone and call you. All right. And remember earlier, I said we were going to shift gears a little bit and we had a lot of information. Okay, so absorb what you can. Again, this information will be available to you tomorrow, but we're going to switch over to interviews. The beauty of an interview is once you get that phone call and that hiring manager has committed to meeting with you, 50% of the battle has been won. They like who you are on paper. They feel that your skills potentially could be a good fit for the organization. And although they'll interview you relative to what you've done in the past, a big part of that interview is going to be about how well you fit into the culture, the type of questions you ask, how you engage. So congratulations. All the work you've done to get your resume and your cover letter looking good, looking sexy, sizzling has worked. You now have the interview. So let's talk about how to ace that interview. Prepare, practice, present, and participate actively. Prepare and practice are really obvious, and we're going to break that up a little bit. But we're not going to spend a ton of time on those two bullet points, because those I think are the most obvious. When I talk about present and when I talk about participate actively, I'm talking about, are you actively listening? And when I refer to actively listening, I see many candidates that come in for interviews in our office that when they talk back to us, they don't make eye contact, or they fidget, or their hands are under the table. So my recommendation is, even if you don't have a friend or family member around, put your phone on your camera, put it on video, and do a mock interview, even if you're doing it with the dog. That's okay. But look at what you do with your hands. Look at what you do with your eye contact. Look at how you answer questions. Really think about what is your body language in that moment, because that is going to be a big portion of how that person interprets you. Okay, so we're going to touch a little bit on the research, and I think the research is obvious, but there is something that we're seeing a bit of a trend on recently. You know, we encourage all our candidates to research the company before you go in for the interview. And most candidates are very diligent. We don't even have to tell them anymore to do their research on the company. They'll go online and they'll look at the webpage and they'll understand the history of the company. They'll look at, you know, maybe who some of the key players are. You know, they'll look at how long the company's been in business, the products, the product lines, and sometimes the company will talk about their mission statement or their values. What people are overlooking is Googling the organization. Because there is information that if you Google anything on the organization or the company that you're going to interview at, that will not be on that website. So some of the examples would be a merger or a recent acquisition, or the company was a private company and then they were bought out by a private equity company. That's information that's important for you to know, because when a company goes through any change or their shares increase or decrease or something happens, that can affect what happens in the organization. And that will also make you look a lot more engaged and a lot more committed to the interview process if you have information on the company that the hiring manager knows you haven't just pulled off the website. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have. You hear us say that all the time. And, you know, I think this is pretty standard, but I interviewed somebody yesterday who had a hoodie on. And yes, we are a recruitment firm, but even if you're interviewing with recruiters like the Headhunters, you really want to put your best foot forward. Ladies, nylons are not necessarily necessary these days. Gentlemen, you don't always need to wear a tie, particularly if you're not interviewing with a downtown organization. But talk to your recruiter to find out exactly what you should wear for dress code, and don't be offended if they coach you. We have your best interests at heart, and we're really trying to help you put your best foot forward. Casual Friday can be a little bit confusing, and even though the company will say to you, don't worry about dressing up, it's Casual Friday, in my mind, if an employer says that to you, it's a trick question. Dress for success, regardless of what day of the week it is. Bring several copies of your resume. My husband just recently interviewed for a job, and I said to him, have you got copies of your resume? And he's like, why do I need to take copies? They've already got it. That's why they're interviewing me. Of course, you can never give a partner any form of advice. And I said, print out copies of your resume. And he was glad he did, because there was more than one hiring manager at the table. So make sure that you're prepared. Make sure you have a notepad and a pen with the copies of your resume inside your resume, inside your binder. Turn off your cell phones. I have to laugh at that one. I can't tell you how many candidates we interview and the phone rings. And I've had candidates who actually take a call. I hope that's nobody on the webinar today. I'm confident of that. But please be on time, do a dry run, give yourself 20 minutes for traffic, particularly in the winter. And better still, leave your cell phones in the car. One of the things that many of our clients do is they will set their receptionists up as kind of the ears and eyes of the organization. So when you go in and you're waiting, they'll intentionally make you wait for 5 or 10 minutes for the interview, and reception will give them feedback. What did you do in the waiting room? Did you pick up a book? Did you look at their trophies? Did you look at their plaques? Did you play on your cell phone? Did you look at Facebook? And how did you treat the receptionist? That's one of the things that we always get feedback on. We value our receptionists so much in our organization. And if candidates don't treat our receptionists with respect, we really question if they're candidates that we want to represent. Employers are no different. So please be very respectful when you go in and meet with the receptionist. They are the ears and eyes to the company. No fishy handshakes, please, guys. And when I talk about the fish handshakes, I'm talking about the handshake where where you grab somebody's fingers and you kind of flap your hand around. Confident, firm handshake where you grab the whole hand. Make eye contact with that person. If you are somebody that is a bit of a fishy handshake, practice that really firm, confident handshake. Grab their hand. Show them that you're excited to be there. After the interviewer, never be afraid to ask or to thank the interviewer for their time and express interest in their role. And there are different ways to do this. I think it's perfectly fine for candidates to say, thank you so much for your valuable time. Can you let me know if there are any gaps in my resume or any things that you feel I need to work on in order to qualify for this role? Personally, when we're hiring for individuals in our own organization, I love that. That tells me that the person is vested, not just in a job, but in my process, in me as a hiring manager. But expressing interest in the role makes me feel valued, makes my organization feel like it's a valuable organization for that candidate. And then again, if your English and grammar is good, send a follow-up or thank you note. We probably still today only get about 2 out of 10 thank you notes. So we really appreciate them when we get them. Just make sure you've run the grammar and the spelling past your granny, your grandpa, or somebody that you know is good at English. So one more poll. We're trying to keep you guys awake. So could you let us know if you are in the habit of sending a thank you email or a thank you note to an employer? We'd love to hear from you. Just waiting for a few more polls to come in. Oh, interesting. Only sometimes. All right. And 23 or never. I would love to know from the sometimes and the never as to why. But if the statistics are sitting at about 2 out of 10, it's a way to stand out, guys. It definitely can add value to your job search. And again, a thank you note should be very short, very sweet, one short paragraph, maybe not even a paragraph, and you can reiterate your interest in the role at that time. I want to talk about the common interview questions that people get stuck on. And these are ones that we spend a lot of time coaching on. So the very first thing I'm going to say on this is, if you have a recruiter in the Headhunters that you have a relationship with and have worked with on and off for years, we are always going to be a good resource. You know, we might not always be the guys to find you employment. We'd love to find everybody employment, but we just don't get that many jobs, as does any other firm. Sometimes it is just about using us as part of your network, not your only network. But I want you to know that part of what we do that makes us uniquely different at the Headhunters is we spend a lot of time coaching and being there for our candidates, supporting you in your job search. And so if you have a relationship with a candidate, some of these questions, with one of your recruiters, some of these questions we can help you answer, particularly the reason for leaving one. So let's talk a little bit about those. The first question that I think, the first interview technique that some of you have seen and many of you will experience at some point in your career, particularly the higher you go in your career, is the behavioral-based interview questions. And those are the ones that sound like, tell me about a time when. And those can be really tricky. I'm not going to teach you how to overcome those questions today because Angela Champ, who was our guest speaker last month, she did an excellent job. She's an HR director for a firm in Vancouver and an old friend of mine. And she actually did an excellent job of talking about how to overcome those behavioral-based questions. So I think that she would be listening, downloading that off our website would probably be the best way to approach that. But some of the questions that people get unglued with is, where do you see yourself in XYZ years? Guys, even if you only have a 2-year retention plan with any organization, please don't tell an employer that you want their job in 2 years, or you think you'd like to own a bead company in the Bahamas in 2 years. Make sure the answers that you give are applicable to the job you're hiring for. And the safest answer is probably to say, I'm looking for a great company where I can continue to grow my skills, where I can learn, where I can work under a strong leadership team and hang my hat. Safe, generic answer, but it's safe. And you want to keep your answer as safe as possible. I've heard so many candidates say to me, I would love to live in the Bahamas. Well, we all would, but most of us, it's not going to happen. So keep it really generic. Greatest weakness. This is one that a lot of clients still like to ask. Greatest weakness should not be relative to the job itself. So for example, I'm in sales. I deal with people all day. We have an excellent administrator in our office. I'm not good at administration, but it doesn't affect the job I do today. So if somebody were to ask me that question, I would say filing or administration. A, it's the truth. And B, it doesn't affect my performance in the job that I do. So pick your weaknesses really carefully and make sure that it doesn't affect the job you do. And then why did you leave your previous role? This is a big question, and we can't get into the meat and gravy of this today, but the tips that I'm going to give you, and this is where, especially if you were laid off or in a termination situation, I would direct questions, ask you to direct questions to your recruiter. But the 3 things that I'm going to leave you with today is, if you left for personal reasons, if you did not like or respect your manager, if you had personality conflict with coworkers, do not mention it. Because what it does is it leaves you wide open to the employer thinking, there's a problem with this person. This person can't get along with other people. This person has conflict. Regardless of whether you were the receiving party or not is irrelevant. Regardless of whether there's some validity to what you're saying or not, it will leave a question mark in the employer's mind. So please handle this very carefully. And the other thing is, and you've heard it before, please, no negativity. It doesn't matter how bad that situation was or how toxic that environment was. Leave the negativity at the door, because an employer, when they meet with you, is always wondering, why should I hire this person? So any reason that you give them not to hire you could essentially hurt your application moving forward. So again, if you have a situation that you have found where it was either unfair dismissal, or you have a legal case with an employer, or you really just don't know how to avoid the fact that you were laid off, or something happened, please direct those questions to your recruiter, and we can help you word track it on answering the question honestly, but in a way that does not hurt you during the interview. And then for those introverts, and I'm sure we have a few, I have some people in my network that are introverts, and honestly, going for an interview is a painful experience. Avoid answering questions with a simple yes or no. Employers are looking to get information from you. So give them as much as you can without rambling. And for those extroverts, don't ramble. You really want to focus on answering the question specifically, precisely. Don't go off down a rabbit hole. Focus on the question, listen to the question, and answer it, giving as much information as you possibly can relative to what you've done in the past. If you are a talker or a waffler, be conscious of it, and that's why role-playing with coworkers or friends will help you tremendously. There's a really fine line between talking too much and not saying enough. The 3 most common questions, or a few of the most common questions, I should say, employers have certain questions that they'll ask you. We covered that, but now they're the 3 questions that I would recommend that you guys have pre-planned. Some people need to pre-plan them prior to the interview, and others can kind of ad-lib. But it's okay to take a notepad and pen into the interview and make notes of questions that you'd like to loop back with. The most important thing is that you actually ask questions. Even if the employer has been extremely detailed and given you tons of information on the company, try and at the very least come up with one good question. Because what it says to the employer is, I am interested in you, the headhunters, Danielle Bragge, or whoever it is that's interviewing you. It tells them, again, that you are not just looking for a job, you are looking for their job. And even though we as employers know that that's not reasonable, all my employers, all my clients that I want to work with, should I say, they want to feel like they're the only firm or only company in the world that you are interviewing for. So make them feel special. And asking questions is a great way to show them you're actively listening, show them that you're engaged, and show them that you're interested in their opportunity. So some of the questions you'll be able to gather based off the website prior to the meeting. You'll be able to, once you've Googled and found out that they were acquired or their shares went up or they added a new product to their product line, those are questions that you can pre-plan for. But here are some suggested questions that you could use in situations. My favorite one being, which is usually a great question. And the reason it's my favorite is because a lot of clients will come back to us and ask and say to us, wow, your candidates were so well prepared. Do you know that she even asked me, or he asked me, what success looked like in the role, where they needed to be within 30, 60, or 90 days. And that's a nice pre-planned one. Best case scenario, or worst case scenario, should I say, the client gives you all this information and you come up with no ideas. That's a great one to bank. We do, and many of you have been through the process at the Headhunters, and you know that we do produce a profiling report that helps us better understand you, helps managers better lead you. We really are committed to seeing you successful in your jobs. But that work style performance profile that we produce for you, it actually has some suggested interview questions. So if you've done or been through our process as a candidate, or if you'd like an opportunity to try our work style performance profile, we can send you a link. Just ask a recruiter, and it'll give you some great questions that you can ask. All right, and last but not least, we threw this in at the end because we're doing more teleconferencing interviews, and I'm sure you're going to see some more of that too. So partly the reason that the Headhunters has moved to more of a teleconferencing way of doing business, and many of you might not have met your recruiter in person, you might have just had an in-depth interview with them over Skype or FaceTime, is because we recognize that when you interview, most candidates are having to interview for 3, maybe 4 jobs before they get a job offer. It just is the market, particularly in Alberta right now. I know the other provinces are a little hotter right now, but we don't want to put you in a situation where now you're taking even more time out of the office. So, and companies are very much the same. They're using the video interview as a first touch to determine whether you are somebody they want to bring in. So this is just as important as a face-to-face interview. You really have to pick your lighting carefully. You have to look at what is your background. Have you got a weird picture behind you? Keep it fairly generic. Think about it in terms of, this is an employer. This employer is coming into my home. What does my situation need to look like to be able to interview with this client with minimal distractions? I interviewed a candidate a couple weeks ago, a video interview, and she kept leaning into the camera, and then she was pulling sideways and left and seemed very distracted. And finally, I just couldn't bear it. I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, my puppy's pulling at my slipper." And so if you have a puppy or a baby or a family, ask somebody to take care of it so that you can be actively there, actively in the moment listening. Internet connection needs to be obviously very reliable. Backup phone number. Test your technology with a friend. And then make sure your username is professionals, particularly for Skype. We see lots of candidates holding a glass of wine, and it's a Skype interview. So that doesn't necessarily set a great example going in. And then dress professionally. I'm good with the pajama pants because most likely it's just going to be from just below the shoulders up, but make sure you still have a jacket on. It's still a professional interview. And for a lot of hiring managers today, they can do a Skype call within 15, 20 minutes And so really what they're doing is they're cutting down the amount of time that they invest in an actual interview. So it is considered to be a first step in the hiring process. And then also look at your body language and your posture. I can't tell you how many candidates, when we Skype interview, they kind of lean in the camera and they look like they got one nose, and then they pull back and it looks, and they kind of move around, and I'm getting a little bit seasick. I think they're probably getting a little bit seasick because we're going back and forward. Really think about your posture, think about your eye contact, make sure you stay in the same position, that you're not coming in and out of the camera. All this is going to help in getting you through the door to the point where you will have that first face-to-face interview. And with that, tons and tons of information. I know we've probably bombarded you with way too much information, but as we said, it is going to be available, and there was a lot to cover based on the most common mistakes that we see. But I'm going to pass it over to Ali. She's going to help facilitate any questions that you may have. So Ali, with that, back over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Danielle. You're right. There was a lot of information there, and I know we've had a few questions coming in throughout the presentation, but please, to all you participants, take a moment now to add your question to the chat, and we'll work through as many as we can here. While we're waiting for a couple last questions to come in, Danielle, I wanted to say I really agree with so much of the insights that you shared today. And really the bottom line, I think, as you said, is the goal of a good resume is to get an interview. So for people to, take the time to put themselves in the company's shoes and make sure that their resume tells the hiring manager what that manager needs to know to have confidence and interest in bringing someone in. And the same with an interview. It's sometimes not what you want to tell them, but more think of it as what they need to learn about you to understand what that good fit looks like for a position. Okay, on to some questions here. Yes, again, the recording will be available to all participants. And first question here is, Danielle, should I put personal interests and hobbies on my resume, or is it okay to mention these in an interview?
Yes, you can put them on your resume. The only thing that I would caution individuals on is if any of your involvements or hobbies are based on anything that could be perceived as political or religious, I would be very careful to possibly not put that on your resume, because again, you don't want people making decisions based on who you are in your private life. You want people making decisions on who you are as an employee. On the other hand, if you are involved in a club that is applicable to the job you're applying for, like a Toastmasters or a sales organization or a particular networking group that's almost like a hobby, but again, applicable, yes, put it on. If you have won awards for anything, in scholarships or anything like that, that tells me that you're a driver. It tells me that you'll go above and beyond. So yes, some things like that you can put on, but keep anything that will allow people to discriminate against you, keep it off your resume.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with those comments. And I think the same goes for mentioning these things in an interview. And often, if you've done a good amount of research, you can understand what charitable causes the company may be involved in, and perhaps that's a place that you volunteered before, or that the hiring manager coaches Little League soccer, and you can talk about the fact that you've played soccer throughout your life and build that credible human link and a connection that really helps break the ice in an interview. Another question here, what about adding a technical skills section to my resume? And I have a strong opinion to say yes to that. That's more and more what employers are looking for, to be able to match certain skills for softwares used or perhaps courses taken. Danielle, any comments you can make on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Ali. I think having technical skills on the resume is very important. To Ali's point, a lot of the organizations, you may not necessarily be the candidate that they choose to bring in for that particular job, but they will keep your resume on file. And how they find you is based on those technical skills. So it could work for you today and it could work for you in the future. But I think it's important for people to know that you are technically literate. I know, if we are talking specifically about certain IT skills, but any kind of technical skill is definitely going to help to tell the audience that you are on top of the trends in the current marketplace today.
A question here, Danielle, for someone who is going to interview as a director of a charity. Do you have any specific tips for interviewing for not-for-profits, given your experience there?
Oh, yikes. That's a good question. I think you mentioned early, Ali, especially for charities, as much as you can put in that shows you to have that credible human connection. So any volunteering that you've had in the past, any obviously not-for-profit experience, even if it was on a volunteer basis. And then a lot of the charities and not-for-profits, you do it a lot of the time for the love, not for the money. So anything that you could have done in the past that was for a passion, is definitely going to help you. But essentially a resume that you submit to a for-profit organization or a not-for-profit is essentially very much the same. The only thing that I would suggest would change would be that you would tweak a little bit would be the cover letter, and that would come into why you are targeting them as a not-for-profit. What are some of the things that they stand for, the values that they stand for, that you think you would be able to, that is a good fit for you?
That's actually a good point, even for all applications and interviews. I think Danielle is really doing the research on what are the corporate values, or what are the principles and passion projects of the organization, so that you can tie in your experience and interests with that of the company, and show that you may be a good fit, not just for the job, but for the team and for the purpose of the organization. So yeah, I'm glad someone asked that question. Great. So a quick last question here is, what about new trends like graphic or video resumes? Do I still need a traditional resume as well?
I'm actually gonna pass that one over to you, Ali. And the reason for that is that Ali's specialization is actually in marketing, digital media, and because you're in the Vancouver marketplace, you probably see a lot more of that than we do. I'm going to say in Edmonton, we're starting to see a little bit of that trend, but not much. We really aren't, not nearly as much as I thought we would see. 5-6 years ago, I thought this was absolutely going to be the way that employers would want to go, and we're not seeing a ton of it, but every marketplace is a little bit different. So why don't you speak a little bit about what you're seeing out there, Ali?
I think it is a good question, because some of those new style resumes are really becoming more prevalent here, but I feel that a safer bet, even understanding what the system requirements are for some application systems, is to keep it fairly basic as a Word resume or a PDF of a resume, and so that it can be accepted into most application systems. Now, to do something with a nice graphical layout in your 1 or 2 page resume, as Danielle said, makes sense, especially for some positions like I work with in marketing and communications. But I would keep a lot of the graphics, again, fairly simple. And the video resume, perhaps, someone may want to provide a quick link to a short summary of themselves by video. That's becoming more common if it's relevant for the work you're doing, or if it's something required by the company. We do have some tech firms out here that ask people to submit in that way, and so make sure to follow those directions. But bottom line is a fairly standard resume per the template that we've got on our website, I think still covers your bases in the best way. Well, thank you, everyone. And we do have a couple questions here that we will follow up with personally by email. We appreciate the time that you spent with us here, Danielle, and so many great examples of how to take action steps right away to make that great impression and get the interview, and from the interview then get that next fantastic step in someone's career. So final housekeeping items here, you'll see a quick survey in our chat and will be sent out to you tomorrow, a link to that same survey. And please take a couple minutes to let us know how we can continue to help you with webinars of interest. Our next webinar is November 13th, and we'll be talking about how to negotiate salary and benefits. So sometimes a sticky subject, and we're happy to offer insights on that. Again, we appreciate your connection with us here at the Headhunters and wish you all a great day.